this? Okay, all right, yeah, for the TV. Okay, so basically, again, for the TV audience, this is an overview of both the way we set our taxes and of the values. So let's just start with the basic budget primer. So now, I'm going to use some approximate numbers. We don't yet have all of our exact numbers, but these are pretty close to what you're going to see. So there could be some final changes. But roughly, this year, we need about $176 million to conduct our business. This is all of the costs involved with both direct appropriations, our water and sewer charges, what we have to set aside for overlay reserve, that's the money to pay for the exemptions, which we're going to talk about, and for people who feel that their taxes are too high because their assessments are too high. So we set aside money for what's called overlay reserve for that. Charges that the Commonwealth charges us, the biggest of which is payment for charter schools, to be honest, which is about 10 million of that 13 million. And then the things that we've spent on free cash in this last year, I've come to you to make some appropriations from free cash. That gets included. So all of that together adds up to about $176 million. Now, as I've said, and you know, there are three main ways that we pay for that number. The first is direct aid from the state, money that comes to us directly from the state, known as state aid. It's on the cherry sheet. This year, it's roughly $82 million. Of course, the large majority of that is for the school department and Chapter 70 money, but the total, excuse me, both Chapter 70 and money coming to the city side is $82 million. That's state aid. The second major source of revenue are local receipts. What are local receipts? Well, there's a list of some of the major ones. Motor vehicle excise tax, about $10, $12 million. Room excise tax, $1 million plus. Meals tax, $400,000 or $500,000. 40U tickets, building permits, water and sewer fees. All of those fees and local receipts that come to the city, that adds up to about another $41.5 million. The balance is made up from local property taxes. Now, that number is a very exact number there. I'm going to describe in the next chart how we get to that. And then on top of that, we have what's called new growth. That's new tax money coming in because of new buildings and new values, and not new values, new buildings, new growth, and additions to property. And that adds up this year to almost $2.5 million. That was a very healthy number. Last year, in comparison, we had $1.3 million in new growth, so that's a big number. The large majority of that increase is due to two things: utilities and the FBI building, which came online this year. A portion of it, at least, came online this year. So the total is $175.4 million, and the difference we make up in free cash. You can see my numbers off a little bit. If you added up all those numbers, the difference is $519,000. We appropriated back in June exactly $493,268 in free cash to balance the budget. I'll tell you that number is going to work perfectly well. So, you know, when you're talking about $176 million, the numbers work when they're this close. So we've appropriated enough in free cash. We don't have to appropriate any more. These numbers will work out fine when we actually finalize what's called the tax recap sheet, which is the sheet we submit to the Department of Revenue. So I want to just explain how, let me just go back. I want to just explain how I know that exact local property tax number, because that is a precise, exact number as to what we can raise in property taxes. I know that number because of Proposition 2.5. We can raise exactly 2.5% more taxes than we raised last year. So we take our last year's limit which was 48.3 million, multiply that by 2.5%, and we can raise another 1.2 million in property taxes. So when you add that to last year's number, we get that exact number of $49,530,906. That's the amount we can raise in taxes under the Proposition 2.5 limit. New growth is good because new growth is outside the limits of Prop 2.5. You get to add it to that number, which is why there's so much pressure to continue to grow. So with new growth, we added another 2.4 million, so we actually can raise not 49.5 million, but 51.9 million, almost $52 million we get to raise in local property taxes next year. Now, how much of that does every individual property owner pay? That all depends on their value of their property and how that value changes. I explained that last year. Proposition 2.5 has nothing to do with individual taxes. Your individual taxes can go up much more than 2.5%. The 2.5% limit is on the total taxes that the city can raise year after year. How those taxes are divvied up among the many individual taxpayers, the 7,000 tax people who own property in the city, that all depends on how their values are rising and falling in a given year. So if my value is rising dramatically and my neighbor's value is rising only a little, I'm going to pay much more taxes than my neighbor is going to pay year over year. So your individual tax bill depends upon the individual valuation of your property. So that's why year over year values are so important. Everyone understands that important point about Proposition 2.5? Because I know I used to get, and I get still questions today, but that's a typical question residents ask. They hear about Proposition 2.5, and they say, my taxes went up more than 2.5%. That's not legal. That's not right. And a lot of times you have to explain. That's an overall cap. Individual taxpayers are not impacted by that. They're impacted by values. So what happened this year on values? Well, this year was what's known as an interim valuation year. Why did Chelsea have an interim valuation year? Well, I should have answers to that. Oh, okay. So we're going to do this one at a time. All right. Valuation updates are mandatory. We must revalue property each and every year. DOR, as I said last time, DOR didn't used to make you do that. Used to be able to get by every 3 years and not change values. Mayors and city managers love that because your value didn't get affected. But now DOR requires mandatory valuation changes each and every year. As I said, that was starting in FY05. Every 5 years, now this is new. It used to be every 3 years, but under this new Municipal Modernization Act, which takes effect on November 7th, now you only have to do this full valuation, certify a full valuation every 5 years. And every 9 years, you have to do this really complete revaluation where you have to go in a certain percentage of homes. We did that last year in FY16, so the city of Chelsea doesn't have to do this one for quite a while, but every 5 years now we'll have to do a full certification, every 9 years even a more comprehensive one. The valuation is based on full and fair cash value. There's a definition of what that means, but basically it means what a willing buyer pays a willing seller at arm's length. It's not so you discount family deals. I sell my property to my son for $1. Those aren't counted. It's fair market and arm's length sales. That's how fair market value is determined. Now, excuse me, what tends to create a bit of a, I don't want to say a problem, but what's unique about municipal valuation is it is always behind the market. And the reason it's behind the market is when we set our values for this year, for this fiscal year 17, which our residents won't see until they get their first actual tax bill in January. We are on a quarterly tax system. We tax every quarter. The fiscal year starts in July, but the first two tax bills, the one that comes out in July and the one that comes out in November, are what's called preliminary bills. They're based on your value from the previous year. The value is then set at this time of year, and the first time you see your new value is on your January bill, which is the first actual tax bill. So the first time people see their new value is January of 2017. That is a fair market value which the assessors have set as of January 1st, 2016, a year before. That's what they're required to do by law. And that January 1, 2016 value is based on sales in calendar year 15. So now I get my bill on 17. It says this is the value of your home. It's based on sales from calendar year 15. So generally, municipalities are trailing the market by a significant amount of time, roughly 18 months behind the market. So it's, when it's especially bad when markets are falling, because people see prices are falling and then they get a bill that shows their value has skyrocketed because it's a value reflecting what happened in the market 18 months ago. For us right now, because values are on a high upward trajectory, as you'll see, and continue to be on an upward trajectory, the values people are going to see on their tax bill in January 17 are far less than their real value. But it's trailing the market, so for them, it's a bit of a benefit. What happened in this new valuation year of 17? 16 versus 17. Well, you can see residential values are up substantially. Values in this community are up tremendously. There's a lot of interest in coming to Chelsea and buying properties, a lot of fortunate for people who want to sell, investor interest, for people who are staying here and might want to sell in the future, good news, but for people who have no desire to sell and are just staying here, this incredibly high valuation pressure is really increasing their tax liability. And you can see why, because of this piece right here. Commercial and industrial properties, they're barely going up at all. Yet residential properties, particularly the 3 and 4 families, the multi-families, are going up dramatically. And what that means is there is a shift in the tax-paying pie from commercial industrial properties to residential properties. So last year in FY16, residential property owners paid about 49% of the taxes in Chelsea. This year they'll pay about 53%. So residential property owners are paying more of the share of the tax pie because their values are rising dramatically and commercial industrial property values are staying pretty flat. That's just a reflection of the market. This is important, this number, this 18.5%, I'm going to tell you in a moment. So, we do things to help residential property owners, as you know. First of all, we have a split tax rate, and we shift the maximum amount we can by law to commercial and industrial properties. The Chelsea has always done the maximum shift of 175%. That is one vote you'll be asked to take on November 7th, the Monday, is to adopt this 175% shift. It is the most you can shift, and it means that commercial and industrial properties pay 1.75 times more than they would pay with a single tax rate. And that's the maximum shift. Chelsea has always done that to provide maximum benefit to residential property owners as a whole, all residential property owners, not just owner-occupants. And then, of course, you provide a residential exemption, which benefits owner-occupants. Now, the great thing about this year is that we have the ability to move from 20% to 35%. That is going to be a great tool for the city to help mitigate against these rising values. Okay? So you have the right to exempt between 20 and 35%. At 20%, you'd be exempting $76,000. At 35%, you'd be exempting about $134,000. I'm going to recommend to you that you not use the full 35%, but this is your call. But I'm going to explain why I'm going to make that recommendation to you. By adopting the 175% shift and by utilizing some portion of this 15% cushion that we have, you should be able to actually decrease actual taxes to definitely single-family homes, definitely two-family homes. Depending on how high you go, you can reduce it for condos. But you could use all 35%. I'm going to show you all the numbers in a minute, and you will not reduce taxes for three families because those values have skyrocketed so much for people who own three-family homes and more. Okay? So I'm going to get to this option in a minute. I just want to tell you, pretty much we know that what the tax rate is going to be. The numbers might change very, very slightly as we finalize our numbers, but basically it's going to be $30.51 is the commercial industrial tax rate, and the residential rate will depend upon which percentage you adopt between 20 and 35. At 20, the tax rate is $13.93 per thousand. At 35, it's $15.23 a thousand. Now, why am I making this point that you shouldn't just adopt the 35% and call it a day? The reason I'm suggesting you might want to consider not doing that is this. If you do that this year, you will, I'm going to go to the 35%. All right. So this is the last group, this group right here, is the 35% exemption this year, okay? If you do that, the exemption amount is worth $2,042. So on your tax bill, everyone who's owner-occupant will get knocked off $2,042. Based on the average single-family home, the average assessed single-family value is $285,700. So if I have a single-family home that's right at the average of $285,700, I get $2,042 knocked off my tax bill. My tax bill will go from $2,918 last year to $2,309 this year. I'll save $609. I will pay $609 less than I paid this year. For a condo, I'll pay $288 less. For a two-family, I'll pay $389 less. For a three-family, even at the max, I'm still paying $361 more. This is the average. This is the average value. Everyone's going to be different because some people have homes valued less than average. Some people have homes valued higher than average. But I can only use the average to make these points. And so this is a significant amount of savings you can give single, God bless you, single condos and two families if you adopt 35%. The problem, it's not a problem, but think about this. If you do that, you have used up all of your tool to help the residential homeowner. Next year, I can guarantee you all of these people will pay higher taxes because values are going up. Taxes never go, our total tax need never goes down. So these people will all pay more. And you'll have nothing left in your toolbox. You'll be at 35% residential exemption. You'll have to stay there unless you really want to whack them. But if you did something sort of halfway in the middle, let's say if you went up to 27.5%. So you didn't use all of the 35%, you went up to 27.5. the average single family will still get a almost $300 reduction in their bill. Condos will pay a little bit more. Two families will get a reduction. And next year, you'll still have 77.5% to play with, which means that probably next year, you'll be able to give these people maybe a little bit of a decrease, but at best, a very modest tax increase. As I said, you might even be able to keep them getting a decrease. Even if you went, let's go one more back. Let me just show you, if you went to 25%, so let's say you decided, hey, in the next 3 years, we're going to slowly get to 35. So we're going to go up 5% a year. This year we're going to do 25. Next year we're going to do 30. The year after 35. Even at 25, I still give single-family homeowners a good tax decrease. Condo owners pay $179 more. You know, no one likes to pay more taxes, but that's not an unreasonable tax increase. And two-family homeowners get a decrease, which is very nice. You can see what happens to three-family owners. They're paying a lot more. From the council's perspective, the difference is this. I can make people very happy in 1 year, and then they're going to be unhappy the next 2 years, or I can make people a little bit happy each of the next 3 years. The three families, you cannot help them. Their values have risen so high that they are paying significantly more taxes no matter what you do. And that's all a function of values of three-family homes and three-family plus skyrocketing. They are paying more in taxes. They're not necessarily going to have to sell. They are paying significantly more in taxes. So this is your call. If I were sitting in your seat, I'd be recommending the moderate approach, helping people each year for the next 3 years, rather than using every tool in your toolbox this year, because I can assure you next year, these people won't remember you gave them a tax break. They'll be mad they got a tax increase. So that's up to you. I'm recommending to you right now, I would go with 25%. At worst, I'd go with the 27.5%. But this is your call. You have to vote on this residential exemption on Monday, November 7th. But those are your options. You can see at 35%, you are giving the biggest break possible. Yes, sir.
Tom, what is the difference in the commercial tax rate from last year to this year?
It's down. What was last year's rate? 32.25? 32.25. This year it's going to be 30.51.
Most of the values of commercial stayed equal?
Yeah, so.
We're not seeing an increase?
Yeah, so we saw that slide. If I go back, it was their values were going up. Let's see if I can get back.
30, 51. Because I didn't see. Usually, there's a chart that tells us. In the years past, we've seen.
So there's the slide. So they're barely going up. So many commercial and industrial property owners, because their value has pretty much stayed the same and the tax rate is going down, many commercial and industrial owners will pay less taxes this year than they paid last year.
And the rate itself is a total requirement or based on having to go to 2.5%, correct?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
The rate that we're charging is a direct result of us having to going to 2.5%.
Yeah, I always recommend that we maximize the taxes even maximizing the tax bill, we're still dipping into free cash.
How much are we dipping into free cash?
$493,000. That's what you.
So if we were to go up to just 1.5 instead of 2.5, then we'd be dipping an extra $500,000 into free cash? or we would have to make some cuts in the budget.
You'd either have to make some cuts in the budget, or you'd need more money in your, you'd have to appropriate more money in free cash. I would never recommend you not utilizing your full levy for taxes, but, and I certainly did not when I submitted that budget.
And if we did do a 1.5 instead of a 2.5 raise, then that would affect all these chart numbers, correct?
You'd have to appropriate significantly more money for your, you'd have to appropriate significantly more money to cover the difference between the taxes you would otherwise be able to raise and to meet your bills. You'd have to appropriate probably, I don't know what that would mean. It'd probably be a couple of million, probably $1 million.
1% would be almost $500,000.
1% of the levy, though, is
Yeah, 500,000.
500,000, yeah.
So 1% equals 500,000. So if instead of going up to 2.5, if we wanted to just do 1.5, we'd only raise $700,000 odd.
You'd have to,
1.2 minus the 5. There's one reason 1.2. I mean,
but
1.5.
you'd have to appropriate more money from
Right,
free cash
free
to
cash.
balance the budget.
And then all of these numbers would,
All of these numbers would change because your tax levy would be different.
and it'll be lower possibly.
Be lower, yes, it'd be lower. I would never recommend you doing
I
that.
understand, no, I understand there's not a city manager who wouldn't do it and say that. I'm just saying there are alternatives, that's all.
I don't think you need to do it this year because you're already given, even at the 25% exemption, you're giving people, you're giving single-family homeowners and two-family homeowners a tax reduction. You have a quiver in your, you have an arrow in your quiver, I should say.
Every year, I always see tree families increase all the time, regardless. Okay, so now here's my question: how many owner-occupied live in tree families, and what is the amount of tree families that are being used for rental income? Because the homeowner that lives there is being punished because of the one that actually lives in a tree family. Because every year, they never decrease. I've been here all these years, and they never decreased. Even now, you said it yourself, it's still go, even with 35%, they will still pay $300 and some odd dollars more.
Yes.
So if they don't get the 35%, what would they increase? So now, what is the amount of one that are used for income and the ones that the actual homeowners live in it? Then we can decide if you want to give a 35% to the ones, the actual tree-family homeowners that live there. Because if you don't give them anything, so you're punishing the homeowner that lives there, regardless.
So,
What is the amount of
I would just have to-
homeowners and rentals?
yeah, I would just have to do the math. So
Well,
the
you
average,
should have those figures.
well, that's one calculation I didn't do, but if anyone has a calculator, this is the average, this 952 three-family homes in the city. This is the average value is $439,400. If you multiply that by, well, the tax rate is going to depend upon which residential exemption you choose. So let's say you chose the 25%. You multiply 439.4 times 1434, that will tell you what the average tax bill of a three-family without the exemption would be.
And what is the amount of actual homeowners that live in those tree families, and what is the amount of the
I'll-
ones that are used without homeowners?
I'll turn to the assessors, I don't know. Some portion of the 952 three-family homes are owner-occupied.
What is the percentage?
Do we know?
10, 5, 20?
Okay. Yeah, off the top of my head, we don't know, but can we get that? Yeah.
About 3,000 residential properties, condos, 1, 2s, and 3s, approximately 3,000 of 4,800 received the residential exemption.
Yeah. So I thought it was about 2,900, but yeah, rough there, yes.
So what is a tree family?
So I don't know, but we could get that number for you. It's some portion of that 952. Yeah.
Through the chair, just,
So, Tom, at what point, let's say if we go for the full exemption, at what point do we actually start eating back into the higher level exempted properties.
You're not. We did that calculation
Okay.
for you when we first presented the 35%
I
exemption.
figured I'd double check in case anything came.
I believe at 20% exemption, there were 3 or 4 properties in the city that were owner-occupied and paid a higher tax because of the residential exemption. That number didn't change when we went to 35%. Those same 3 or 4 properties still paid more taxes than they otherwise would have paid if you had no residential exemption. That's why we presented, it was kind of a no harm going to the 35%, because you didn't capture any more owner occupants in those who got penalized by the residential exemption. You have enough non-owner occupants in Chelsea that is not a problem here. That is a problem in adopting the residential exemption in a lot of communities that don't have as many absentee owners. But you have a significant amount of absentee owners, so the residential exemption is mostly picked up by absentee owners with a few handful of exceptions.
All right, and I just have one other question. So my other question would be, if we take, let's say we take a rental building that has 500 units. When that building gets built, this year it would be new, next year it would be added in with everybody else. Does that actually kind of have the effect of lowering the taxes for home occupants? Because they would be paying more because of the exemptions? Do I have that right?
I'm not sure I understand that question. I thought you were going in a different direction, so say that again.
So you put a 500-unit box, new, let's say, well, let's use Parkside Commons. I think that's 250 units. That's been around for a couple of years, so that's included with everything else as we move forward. Building that building, did that have the overall effect of lowering the taxes of, let's say, a house across the street, or increasing the taxes of the house across the street?
It generated new growth, so in some sense it gave the city additional funds in which to work with, which means that we didn't have to, the overall impact of that is it helps the rest of the taxpayers. The more new growth you have, the better off every remaining
Well,
taxpayer
that's why I picked something
is.
a couple of years old, though, so it's
So
not new
it's
growth
now
anymore.
built in to the calculation, but those people, because that building is not owner occupied, it's all rentals, that building is taking the brunt of the residential exemption, so picking up the slack for the residential exemption. That building is paying, under the residential exemption, much higher taxes than it otherwise would. So those people are benefiting owner occupants because they're paying higher taxes than they otherwise would if you didn't have a residential exemption.
Overall, that actually decreases the tax that owner occupants
Tax
have to pay.
burden on owner occupants, yes.
I see some head shakes, I don't know why.
You always benefit from additional growth in the city.
So that's the assumption I'm making, but I'm hearing some concerns that, why is that a concern?
First, I'd like to offer a different opinion as a fellow owner of a 3-family. I know that during the years of possibly 2009 to 2011, maybe even 2012, when the housing market had crashed, the taxes, I saw my taxes on the 3-family go down. They went down because the values of 3 families went down. So I will disagree with what is said that the prices of 3-family or the tax burden of 3 families never go down. That is absolutely not true, and I will bring old tax bills to remember, because I remember it being at $3,300 one year, and it went down to $29, and then $28. So values went down, tax burden went down, and no one came up here to complain that their values or they were paying less in taxes. So there was a period in time when people, homeowners, were paying less in taxes. That is, there's facts. So I want to make sure. And now, unfortunately, one of the highest rises of all the different tax properties, and I think my colleague in real estate can back me on this, the highest rises that have occurred in the city of Chelsea, dramatically as a percentage, have been three-family homes. They are getting gobbled up and spitting out there that $600,000 now compared to what was $300,000, 4 years ago. So that is why they're rising, and there's nothing you can do, that's just the market. Regarding your comment, why I shake my head and laugh, is related to the question I asked earlier. New buildings and where we push for new growth and such, and we're excited about hotels and everything, it's great when new growth comes in, and we had that number. However, it doesn't lessen the burden for a present homeowner in years forward if you continue to grow the budget every year, 155, 156, 158. I use the term, you keep on feeding this beast, which is the budget process of municipality, or running a municipality. The only way it helps new growth, helps lessen the burden of existing tax base, is if you stay here with your expenditures, or relatively low, and you don't allow it to continue to grow, and outpacing what you're building. And that's, unfortunately, new growth or the increases in our budget have been outpaced by new growth continuously. So I say, what if we do just 1.5%? Well, no, you don't want to because you're eating more into your free cash. Well, we're doing that because when it comes time to the budget, we don't try to stay within our means. And whether it be health costs, offering new services and such. So that's a bigger, broader debate on the budget, but that's big, that's why it doesn't lessen the burden, because the budgetary process continues to rise up. And I'm not ranting about it, just explaining that the budget continues to get higher and higher and higher.
So I comprehend that, and I understand the point you're making, but when you look at something pound for pound, if we are exempting homeowners from tax, that's going to automatically increase the tax for every other person who's around them. We're exempting them by higher than that growth. So I understand taxes will still go up, services might need more, you might be talking about from an expense point of view, but from an actual tax point of view, it does, and I'm not arguing for more buildings, I'm just saying logistically speaking, it doesn't make any sense that having a building that's not exempt would not lead to decreasing the taxes of the small number of home occupants we have in the city. If home occupancy went up tomorrow, if we doubled our home occupancy rates, that would be the one serious thing that would actually destroy all the home economics we're talking about. The worst thing that you want as a home owner-occupant, ironically enough, is for a home occupant to move next door, because that will actually increase your rates.
And if you follow that argument, which I agree with you, if the trend is in the city of Chelsea that all these three families that are just one floor owner occupied get bought, and we have a rash of condo conversions, and more multifamilies get bought by a developer and they turn into individual condo owners, then our whole housing stock turns and we will run into that problem that you just described.
My colleague earlier said, I've never seen my tax drop, and I've been here 38 years. On the bad time, even when the tax will crash, the housing market crashed, my taxes didn't go down, and everybody else's value, the taxes were all the same because everything crashed. So, as far as saying the taxes went down, I've never seen my tax go down. I've never seen it in 2009, 2002, and I've been here 37 years. Not once in my life have I ever seen my tax go down. If I was paying $500, even when it crashed, I was paying $503. It didn't go to $490. I've never seen it. I've never seen it.
I'm gonna hold up. Instead of, nobody knows what kind of house you live in.
It's not the point.
Specifically, and we're
The
talking
point is,
specifically about
I've never
your
seen
tax
taxes
bill.
go down. Have
All
you
right.
ever seen your taxes go
Council
down?
Avenata says his has gone down in a three-family. You say you haven't. I don't know what kind of family you live in, but we're away from the presentation.
But
Let's
it doesn't
continue with
matter, the
presentation.
tax rate, I've been
Councilor
here all
Tahani.
these years with you, right? Have you ever seen a three-family go less than 18?
Council Avenata said his has gone down in
But
the
I lived
past.
here
and
40 years and it never
I
went
do
down.
believe they are, but it's really not consequential at this moment, except that you contest that they've never gone down. Duly noted. Council Tahada?
Before you, I just want to follow one more thing on Councilor Frank's point. The best new growth is commercial growth, because really, part of a piece of what's driving these higher taxes this year is that shift from commercial to residential when it comes to paying the whole tax pie. The more commercial growth you have, the more portion of that pie is paid by commercial and industrial property owners. The goal is to get that shift, not to go from 52 to 49 like it's going this year, but to get it to shift back towards commercial and industrial properties. The more of those that you build, then the better, the bigger a piece of that tax pie is paid by commercial and industrial property owners, which means everyone's residential property taxes would start to mitigate a bit. So that's the best new growth. That's why the FBI building is so beneficial to the city, because it's a huge piece of new growth for the commercial and industrial base. The problem is the valuation changes in the residential sort of made that inconsequential, because there was so much of a shift to the residential side because values changed so dramatically on that side and didn't change at all on the commercial side. I'm sorry, Councilor Tahada.
I was gonna say, so we're good.
So let me just finish these few more. So this is the second vote you have to take. You got to vote on the 175% shift. That's vote number one. The second vote is the necessary vote to determine how much of this 15% cushion you now have on the residential exemption you want to utilize in this fiscal year. My recommendation would be use 5%, go to 25%. Next year, you'll have 10% to play with. You might be able to get away with 5% next year and 5% in FY19, and now you've spread the benefit over 3 fiscal years, as opposed to using all the benefit up in 1 fiscal year. I just want to remind the council that you have done other things to lessen the burden on some owner occupants, on our senior owner occupants. So you adopted this clause 17E. This is a provision that says if you are 70 years or older, own and occupy your home for 5 years, you get a tax break of $179 this year. That goes up each and every year by the rate of inflation. It was started at $175. It's now $179. There's no income limit. You can qualify for this exemption no matter how much you earn, but it does have an asset limit, which is also adjusted each year by inflation. So it used to be $40,000, now it's $40,892 for FY17. And the asset limit does not include your home, so that's assets other than your home. So this is a decent exemption. You have to be 70 at least to take advantage of this, and it's not a huge amount of money. You also adopted this 41D, a much better valued exemption, but it has more stringent requirements. This one, you don't have to be as old, so that's less stringent. You can be 65 years. But this one, what the difference is, this one has income limits. So you have to, you can only make, if you're single, $20,464. If you're married, you can make a little over $30,000. These values go up by the rate of inflation as well each year. There's an asset limit, which is the same as the 17E. But this exemption is worth $1,000. So this is a nice exemption for people who do qualify. This is mostly lower income owner occupants. These are statutory exemptions, but you really added a lot to these exemption by votes last year. You did two other things you've already done, which are very helpful. One, you've doubled the value of the exemption, so that $1,000 exemption is really worth $2,000 to people, and that $179 is worth $360. I don't know what my math is, but it's double $179. And you voted that last year, and that will be in effect every year until you vote otherwise. You've also just recently gave a personal property exemption to small business owners. If your personal property is valued at under $10,000, you don't pay any personal property tax. So those were two nice things that were done. I just want to point out one thing on the doubling of exemptions. The statute says that your exemption gets doubled, but you can never pay less taxes than you paid the year before. So that sometimes puts a cap on how much of that you doubling you can utilize. So I just want to point that out. And then the final thing is that what happens next, November 7th, you've got to do 2 votes, as I said. You vote the maximum shift, which you've always done, 175%, and then you've got to determine what the residential exemption is going to be. Again, by law, you can now go up to 35%. I would recommend this year you do 25%, but that's your decision. And that's the presentation on this year's taxes. So any more questions? And everyone has all these slides before them.
Councilor, go ahead. Can you explain me, if I own a 3-family apartments and I live there, and in the meantime, there's a lot of people who owns a lot of buildings, they just use it to rent. Do I pay more taxes than them? Or
No, you'll get the benefit of the residential exemption, so you will pay much less taxes than those people who
use it for commercial?
don't live at a 3-family, but nonetheless, you're going to pay more taxes this year than you paid last year. Whereas for a single-family homeowner, as you increase the residential exemption, many of those people are going to pay actually less taxes in FY17 than they paid in FY16. Their tax bill will actually go down. And that's true of single families, that's true of 2 families, and depending upon which of these exemptions you choose, it may be true of condos, but you'd have to choose one of the higher exemption numbers to get condos to go down. But your bill, if it goes up $600, your neighbor's bill may be going up $1,200. You will get a benefit for being an owner-occupant. It's just not going to be enough to reduce your bill below what you paid last year. It's going to increase. You're going to be paying more this year than you paid last year, but certainly not, you would be paying a lot more if you weren't an owner-occupant. So yes, you're getting the benefit of residing in that home. Yes.
The commercial didn't go up that much, right?
Correct.
How much commercial property do we actually have?
I don't know the exact number of parcels that we have for commercial. You know? How many
Do you want the parcels or the percentage of the tax? Are you looking for the actual number of parcels
Yeah,
or
the actual
percentage
number
of the tax bill?
Right, that commercial has.
You want the actual number of parcels,
Yeah, how many properties are commercial?
okay?
It looks like there's,
You said 800.
yeah, maybe possibly something like that. I can't find the figure, but that sounds about right.
Did it increase or decrease?
Their values,
Last year to now, did it increase or decrease?
values,
No, the commercial. You said 800. How many do we have
oh,
now?
it hasn't gone up all that much. I mean, I know the FBI building is one more than we didn't have last year, but we haven't added all that many commercial parcels.
Councilor Vito.
In looking at the rise in in the taxes for our residents. I'm just curious, I know that in the past, we've had to give out tips to give people incentive to build here in Chelsea. I'm just curious as to at what point do we stop doing that to shift the burden from the residents onto people who have the capability to make more money?
Well, generally, you're only giving tips to commercial property owners. Generally, the rule is to entice them to come to the community, you give them a tip. To add to get them to do a new investment and increase their value, you give them a tip. So in theory, they wouldn't otherwise come or they wouldn't otherwise invest without the TIF. So if that theory is true, then you're not losing anything by giving the TIF. In the absence of the TIF, you'd get no new tax dollars. With the TIF, you're getting some new tax dollars. Not as much as you'd get without the TIF, but the theory is you wouldn't get any without the TIF, because people wouldn't invest in the absence of the TIF.
You think people really wouldn't invest considering all the people that are here already? Like, Chelsea's a place
I
to be.
think for some people, the TIF is the difference between investing and not investing. Yes, I do think that is absolutely a fair statement.
Would you explore a TIF-free world?
You can have a policy, you don't want to give any TIFs. I think it lessens your ability to attract business to the community. Because you want to say, come here, we can offer you a tax break that you can't get somewhere else. And that's why you should invest here in Chelsea.
Thank you.
So can I just add, the TIF is generally a percentage of what they would pay if you shared it 100%. So they're not here, then you give them a TIF for, say, 50%. So you're getting half of what they would pay if you gave them nothing, but that's still more than you got before they were here. And then if the TIF lasted a couple years as a drop-off, by the end of a certain period of time, you'd be getting 100% of it, and presumably that's
Yeah,
forever,
my question
or
is,
as
what
long
if
as
we
you
got
get-
100% from day one?
No, I understand.
But
Yeah,
the
I understand.
difference is, at least in theory, someone won't invest. So just as an example, I mean, I guess you can always test this and say, we're not giving you a TIF, and let's see if you invest or not. The owners of the Wyndham have said, we'd like to invest. We have an upgraded hotel brand. We can't make the numbers work without a TIF on the incremental value. So we want to invest $3 million or $10 million, but the TIF's going to make the difference as to whether we make this investment. If we don't give them the TIF, we could test whether they invest or not. They can leave the property as is. The TIF is only going to mean that we're going to give them some break on the incremental value they add to the building. They're going to continue to pay taxes on their base value, whether we give the TIF or not. So that's an example where someone has come and said, I'm not making my decision until the council acts on this TIF.
I understand. For me, it's the residents don't have the luxury of saying, you know what, I can't make it, and getting, help that way, and it's a stinker.
So, the legislature has decided that's not something they want to offer residential homeowners. They offer these other options to residential homeowners, residential exemptions, the statutory exemptions for senior citizens. So they offer tax breaks in different ways.
My point is, and I think you understand, is that my point is that if you offered no TIF and they didn't come, then they add nothing to the community. If you offer a TIF of, let's say, 50% one year, 75% the next, and then it goes up to 100, whatever, it's over a 3-year period, you are still getting 50% of something.
Something is better
Something.
than nothing is what you're saying.
If that's the difference, whereas if they walked, so you are collecting less than 100% of what you could collect, but it's still more than you had because there was nothing before. That's
I get it.
my thing.
The property could stay vacant.
Right, or stay vacant, right.
Have you run any numbers in regards to if the CPA passes, what effect that'll have on the homeowners?
It will have no effect on any of these numbers. All the CPA will mean is that if it passes, whatever your tax bill is based on these numbers, you'll pay another 1.5%. So if your tax bill is $1,000, you'll pay another, whatever 1.5% of that is, $15. Yes, $15.
That was my only
Council
question.
Frank?
I don't know if you have these numbers with you or if you've looked at the historical numbers, but if I recall, in the mid to early 2000s, more than 50% of our budget came from state aid. Do you know if I have my numbers right or not?
Yeah, you're just
And now we're
about
at-
there.
Now we're
Yeah,
at
it's still there.
46.6, according to my calculation. So have
Well,
we-
but that 176,000 is everything in the mix, water and sewer charges. So I don't know what that 50% was based upon. Remember, the budget I submitted to you was $155 million. So on that basis, you're paying more than 50%. The state has given you more than 50%. That 176 is the 155 plus all this other stuff that we've appropriated over the course of the year. So it's not really the real budgetary appropriation number. It's the budgetary appropriation number plus some other stuff.
So I guess my question then would be,
Oh, so plus state charges are included in that number as well.
do we have a way of finding out if over the past decade or 15 years, if we've released ourselves of some of the, so basically right now.
Yes, there's a simple way to test your theory. All you have to do is pull your tax recap sheet. There's a line for your total budget on that sheet, and there's a line for your state aid on that sheet. And you just have to compare the two. So I could compare this year's to 2005 and see if there's any percentage difference. Be happy to do that tomorrow.
Yeah, if you'd be able to do that, then send it to
Yeah.
us, because the concern I have always had, is we depend so much on state aid, and whenever the state has a hiccup, the first thing they do is they rush over to the state aid vault, and they close it, and they stop giving us money, and that kind of severely affects our budget. So, yeah, I'd really be curious to see it from 2003, let's say, because I vaguely recall that was a shift in the budget time.
Yeah, 2003 was the first year of mid-year local aid cuts. Then there was a
Exactly.
second round in 2009. So I could go back to 2003 recap sheet, which was pre the budget cut, and see what that percentage was versus what it is today.
Okay, that would be excellent, thank you.
I just need, someone's going to have to pull from me the 2003 recap sheet and the I just need the first 2 pages of that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other counselors? Sorry?
Interested citizens?
Any interested citizens wish to ask any questions?
I have one.
Oh, I wonder why we did that. Chair recognizes Mr.
I'm
Castillo.
curious, in the TIF agreements, in order to get a shift from the actual tax rate to more commercial properties paying taxes, did we ever look at the formula when they are at the full values, what if there would be a shift? In other words, an estimate, can we come up with that down the road? How many commercial properties are working on TIF agreements now? When they exceed or get to the last year of their agreement, can we see that 0.4% shift?
Yeah, that would be an interesting, tedious calculation, I think.
I thought it would be, but that's why I said I wouldn't expect it now. But
Yeah.
it would be interesting to note that.
I would imagine that is possible to do. How tedious that would be, I don't know. That could be like a day's worth of locking yourself in a room and trying to figure out that number.
Because it would be easier to explain to the actual property owners that down the road, because I've been questioned a lot on TIF agreements, and where are we heading with it? If we had a goal to meet that say we're hopefully going to shift your tax rate maybe by 5% because they're going to pick up more. Because years ago, they used to give the commercial properties as much as they had to pay. They would really increase them as much as they could before they would increase the property taxes. They used to take us to court all the time.
Yes.
That's why I know.
I think there was a lot more leeway in what assessors could do
Right.
when we're talking 20-plus
Before the
years
2.5,
ago.
right.
as to how you could manipulate values. Those days are gone now. DOR is,
That's why I thought that would be
Watches you like a hawk.
a good show for the actual taxpayer, if someday you could come out with that kind of release.
I don't know if that's reasonably possible. You could do that calculation without putting days and days of work in. Maybe we can hold that for,
Anybody else? Seeing none, meeting is closed.
okay, thank you, Jim.